My bad. Let me do it again. Hello, everyone. Michael Jordan fans are the best, and today we're having the long-awaited debate between myself and NNB Sports. We've talked about doing a debate for quite a long time, and now we've made it happen with the MJFB Summer Debate League. I will be arguing for the 80s being a greater era, and Nick, NNB Sports, will be arguing for the 90s. How are you today, sir? And do you have anything you'd like to say before we start this debate?
No, nothing to say. Glad to be here as always. Disappointing end to the Mavericks, but we got a good, I think, couple of years coming up here, so we'll see what happens.
Absolutely. As I was saying before, I'm excited to do this. It's been a long time coming. And we didn't discuss this, but I'm just assuming you'd like to go first. Would you like to go first?
Yeah, I usually that's my default, if you don't mind.
Yep, you have the choice too because you had made it farther along in the winners bracket. So
Okay.
I had lost, so it's your decision. With that being said, are you ready?
Let's go.
All right. Free timers are not the best because I got to press the start button down here. But we'll start it with a 10-second primer. We'll get into it. You good to go?
Let's go.
Let's do it.
As usual, I must state how close this particular topic is, as always. So I had the 90s number 1. I had the 80s number 2. So we're talking about the slimmest of margins for me personally. And so that's how I mainly want to start this off, right? Anything I say is mainly meant as a descriptor, trying to get my point across. It's not meant to say necessarily that the 80s wasn't good or the 90s was so much better or something like that, right? And so, as usual with this debate bracket we're having, the list of all-time great players and all-time great moments for an entire decade or era or 10 years are obviously too many to count, and they're way too hard to compare, right? If we were going to try and break it down that tediously. I will, of course, get into certain things like players and styles, but really I just wanted to get my main reason why I picked the 90s or what gave them the edge over everyone else, right? And why I ultimately picked the 90s can be described in 3 words: hard salary cap. In the 90s, we see the most even and level playing field that the NBA has probably ever seen. A few ways you can see this are in things such as a much deeper and tighter preseason betting odds for the championship, many more teams going much deeper and are separated by much less odds than what we usually see in any other era. You can also see how having 2 all-stars was a rarity, let alone having something like 3 or 4 was essentially not even a thought, right? And so when we look at some things like the hard salary cap, there are also other things such as bird rights and exceptions, right? And ultimately what this is doing in the 90s is we're seeing a sort of a culmination of rules actually being implemented before not having a salary cap. And then of course afterwards, we had things like banana boat culture, right? Is what I'm just going to call it, where teams are where people and players are kind of navigating and networking around building a team and constructing a roster and maybe working the salary cap a little bit, right? In the 90s, we have the essential culmination of where competition meets talent, right? We have the most spread out era of basketball that we've ever seen in terms of teams drafting talent, getting to retain it, having more leverage, and making sure that there's much more parity throughout the league. And ultimately, that's why I picked the 90s, why I gave them a slight edge, right? And I'll get into some other things, but ultimately it is with this implementation of the hard salary cap. Before the banana boat culture, people are still competitive. With media and television and cable, we're getting to see players up close and unfiltered like never before. But ultimately, right, the hard salary cap I think, is what gives it an objective sort of competitive advantage over some other eras or other decades.
Well, again, thanks for coming, Nick. I'm excited to get this thing started off. But a couple of things that I just want to say regarding what you were saying. I believe the whole general managership and administrative stuff is minuscule to the topic at hand of how the 80s are greater than the 90s of what I'm debating. And I also believe that the parity of great teams over the course of the 80s is more important than spreading out with the expansion era, as it's called, of players throughout more teams. But there's things that I want to talk about. Why is the 80s considered the golden era of basketball? Because it's the standard. The topics I'm going to cover is going to illustrate how the 80s were greater than the 90s. You can't compare players from different eras and different teams with different rules, so it's going to be hard. However, I'm going to give you an idea of why I think these things I'm talking about defines that. First, I'll talk about what greatness is. Greatness means markedly superior in character or quality, and I'm going to explain how with the following subjects. The 80s, in my opinion, had more individual greatness than the 90s. The 80s had greater parity in team greatness than the 90s. 80s had more influence on the game of basketball than the 90s, and I'll explain why with that later because there may be some pushback with that. 80s had more iconic moments than the 90s, I would say. The 80s set the foundation for the modern NBA for a plethora of things, but these are the core foundations of what they surround. Because stats can't be truly measured across eras and titles earned are the same across any era, which I generally use, I'm going to bring awards into this discussion because it's the only other thing that I can do because you can only win one title per year for of the things that you can. I truly don't think you can go star player for star player, team for team with the 80s versus the 90s. I think the 80s have them. The 80s are credited for saving the NBA and produced a star power that made it a worldwide brand. These stars include Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Michael Jordan, Moses Malone, Dr. J, Isaiah Thomas, Dominique Wilkins, amongst others. And just the thing with these players specifically that transcended into the 90s and helped boost the 90s for some of the arguments you may have is that the stars of the 80s culminated with the 1992 Dream Team, where the majority of players at that time played most of their careers in the 1980s. I think that the 90s is a great era, but I think all of these things combined make it greater in the 90s.
That's interesting about the 92 Dream Team, because when you said that, I said, "Oh, that's right." But then, when I kind of think about it, a lot of those guys are defined by the 90s, I would think, more than the 80s maybe. That one's actually kind of interesting. An 80s 90s era debate amongst the 92 Dream Team. One thing that I thought is going to kind of go to my next point that you said, which I sort of agree with in a way, and then I'll kind of illustrate the other side of the coin to talk about what I'm saying, is that in the 80s, probably the top 2 to 5 teams, right, were probably on average better than maybe any given year the top 2 to 5 teams were in the 90s. I would probably go with you on that one. But to illustrate my point, right, is that the difference in, obviously in the 80s, the Celtics and the Lakers were I don't mean this as an insulting word, but they were top heavy in terms of what they represented in the league at the time, right? They won, I think it's 8 out of 10 titles in the 90s, right? And I think when the Pistons came in at the end there, they won in 89 and 90. So like they essentially were the league for the 80s, right? And again, the golden era, agree. Probably I define the 80s as like the must-watch TV generation. Absolutely right that it catapulted the NBA marketing and media-wise into another stratosphere, saved the league. Absolutely 100%. I think all that should be acknowledged, right? But again, when I look at the 80s through this very, very particular and tight lens about 80s versus 90s, I do think that the parity advantage goes slightly to the 90s, right? I think the 80s is a little more top heavy. Again, I think with the no salary cap, I think that would sort of lend that to be true. But again, once we get past Jordan and then once we get past the Celtics and the Lakers, right? I think there are many more teams in the 90s that had a shot at being that next best team and getting a shot at Jordan than after the Celtics and Lakers. I don't think a lot of people really had it. I don't want to say they didn't have a chance, right? But the Celtics and the Lakers were just the teams, right? Though they won 8 out of 10 championships, so that's not by mistake or anything like that. But I think the parity argument is a big one people focus on when we talk about what was the better era. I think people try to look at from top to bottom how competitive was the league, right? So I have to disagree a little bit. I think the 90s had more parity top to bottom, maybe not the top 5 or 10, but again, the expansion era had settled in. We kind of get who we get, and we see a lot of 50, 60 win teams in the playoffs, right, in the 90s. So I think the parity top to bottom's a little better in the 90s after the peak teams and players.
All right. So just some retorts. The guys talking about the '92 Dream Team, but they still were selected because of what they did in the '80s. Even if they did better in the '90s, it just showed how great they were in the first place and how they transcended even through the '90s when they cut their teeth per se within the '80s. And you were talking about the players and the teams that there wasn't really a shot for people, but I don't want to go down this rabbit hole too long because I got a lot of time dedicated to this. But you got the Pistons and you got the Bulls that came out from the East specifically within the early 90s. The Lakers, you could say the Portland Trailblazers, they made 2 NBA finals during that time as well. So you could put them there as well. Um, and you were saying they were top heavy. The 76ers also went to the NBA Finals 3 times, the Rockets twice during that span while those guys were up top, and the Pistons otherwise. But I wanted to talk about some of these things that these players did. So, specifically, let's go with Magic Johnson. As a rookie, won Finals MVP. I believe that's the only time that's ever happened. During the '80s, he was a 7-time All NBA first team guy, 9-time NBA All Star. And then you got Larry Bird. Um, he was a 3-time MVP 3 times in a row. The only 2 guys ever do that before were Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain. He was a 9-time NBA All Star, 9-time NBA All First Team. And then we got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Even in 1980, he won an MVP, even though he had all of that stuff that he had done prior. He was a 10-time NBA All-Star, 4-time All-NBA First Team. We got Moses Malone, also a 2-time MVP in the 80s. Just to clarify, all these awards they won in the 80s. He was a 10-time NBA All-Star, and he was a champion as well, as everyone knows. And then there's one guy that I just want to talk about briefly that you may hang your hat on a little bit too is Michael Jordan. Michael Jordan won 5-time NBA All-Stars since 1985. He won the Rookie of the Year. He won an MVP in 1988. And then he also was the Defensive Player of the Year. I think that says a lot for how great he was in the 90s. And there's more things I'm going to bring up about Michael Jordan in the 80s as well. Then you got Isaiah Thomas, who also was an 8-time NBA All-Star and 3-time NBA All-NBA First Team. When I look at these guys, and there's more guys, I think pound for these 6 guys versus who you compare to the 90s, I would pick these guys over the guys in the 90s in a heartbeat. Now, that's just my opinion. I gave the awards. I didn't really go into the titles that much, but that's my take.
Yeah, so I agree. Like I said, I call the '80s kind of the must watch era for the NBA that and basketball overall that took it to the new heights. And to be honest, right, it started in '79 with the NCAA championship game with Bird and Magic, still the most watched NCAA basketball championship game of all time, right? So like, there's no doubt about the kind of the media influence or the way that it took the game to another level. And I've always said if I could like maybe be in my high school or college years and I could pick watching the Celtics Lakers dynasties go at it in the 80s or rewatch Jordan, I'd probably pick the Celtics and the Lakers, right? I think that was probably the most compelling NBA basketball TV that maybe we'll ever see, right? Just the twin stardom doppelganger of Bird and Magic, right? Both 6'9", white, black, East Coast, West Coast, Lakers, Celtics, right? It just doesn't get any more compelling, right, than those storylines, right? The showy West Coast and the blue collar East Coast, right? There was just so many different things, but yet they were the exact same in terms of their competitive nature, right? So absolutely must watch TV in my opinion. But I also wanted to get, speaking of the media, right? I wanted to talk a little bit about the 90s media and the style of ball, right? In my opinion, right, in the 90s too, I kind of mentioned in my intro, we get sort of like this first kind of backstage glance, up close, unfiltered view, cable TV interviews before PC culture, before banana boat culture. And we really, I think in the 90s, I think maybe the must-watch TV of the Lakers and Celtics on the court gets over Jordan for me a little bit. But the off the court and the media, Charles Barkley, I am not a role model. The athlete of the 90s to me is just the coolest thing I think we've ever seen. I think it was so raw and it was really how people are. Uh, and this is not a slight against anyone today. I also think in the 90s, right, people were much more well spoken, right, with this media rocket ship that had taken off with things like cable TV and the interwebs and all that kind of stuff, right? And so as much as we got to kind of see Bird and Magic, we didn't really get to maybe we're not deserving of it, right? But we didn't really get to see all this kind of 24/7 coverage of everything that was going on, right? And I think with the 90s and, I think of things like Slam Magazine and stuff like that, right? I just think the access to the athlete and the kind of athlete we got that in return that interacted with us, I think is the coolest thing we've ever seen in terms of that aspect of the NBA.
Now, I think the 90s interviews were great that you were talking about, and it's something that I enjoy as well with the cable and all the commercials. They existed in the 80s. I'm not saying to the extent that what you're saying, but it grew because of the star power of the 80s. The 24/7 coverage, it's not like they weren't being covered. They just weren't being covered as much, but how they were being covered. Magic Johnson going doing the cheerleader special during the summertime where maybe he perhaps got his best defensive strategy of catching HIV. That's something that Dylan said the other day, but just to be a little light with it. It was all because of that sort of stuff. But I want to get back into things that I think make the 80s greater than the 90s, and I think the teams in general at the top. Now, obviously, the 90s Bulls are amazing, but that's just one team. I've got 3 or 4 teams that I think that are match in ways how great the Chicago Bulls were. They may not have been great individually, but I think collectively they were greater than the Chicago Bulls team and of all the teams in the 90s. So first off, it's the Boston Celtics, and one year specifically I want to bring up is the '86 Celtics. They had a 17-3 start. They're famously known for going losing one game at home the entire season. They went 11-1 through the first 3 rounds of the playoffs, and then they won, I believe, in 6 games to the LA Lakers. Another team is the 1987 Los Angeles Lakers. They went 65-17. I believe I think the Celtics went 67-15. They the '87 Celtics also went and they had an 11-1 run through the Western playoffs as well, and then they won in 6 games. So that's kind of a wash between two of those greatest teams of that era. Then there's the 1983 Philadelphia 76ers. I believe that they won 65 games, and they only lost 1 game throughout the playoffs. All of these teams, the Sixers went to 3 championships, the Celtics went to 5, and then the Lakers went to 8. It's more than how the parity of great teams in respect to the playoffs, how it happened in the 90s. So I think that propelled the greatness of being able to sell the league at the time, having stars that consistently made the finals. And even though that the Lakers and Celtics won 8 of those, I believe all of those teams were star powered, Dr. J, all these guys too. So I think that made that greater than the 90s.
Yeah, we're kind of talking. I think we're kind of getting into this like topic of how deep was each era after after the Bulls in the 90s and the Lakers Celtics in the 80s. And again, I've kind of said maybe those first few teams after that in the 80s on average were better. But I think after the Bulls, this is kind of one of those things where I think in the 90s, due to the salary cap, the way it had been enforced and it was actually working as intended in the 90s, it had kind of really taken hold with what they had wanted to do. It really is, in my opinion, I think the 90s, you could say, is the purest litmus test in a way, if that makes sense. If everything's really spread out and the differences from top to bottom, if you look at something like preseason betting odds, right? If it's so close, right, then maybe this is the best litmus test we've gotten of who is really good. And that's another reason why I do have Jordan as high as I do, is I feel like he just left no doubts for his time that he was the best guy, right? And maybe that's something to do with the salary cap. And maybe that's a different conversation for a different time, right? But so with this, right, if you look at all the teams that came after the Bulls through the years, right, there's been a lot of good to great to amazing teams that would have won a ring or been great otherwise, right? I mean, you could theoretically start with the Pistons at the beginning, the turn of the era, right? And even the Lakers still went to a finals there, even though they lost, correct, to Jordan and the Bulls. You have back-to-back Rockets in the middle. You have great pairings like Gary Payton and Sean Kemp coming up. You have Barkley and KJ. You got Shaq and Penny, right? You have so many of these great duos and whatnot that would have maybe been seen a little different had Jordan not been around. But the fact there were so many of these different teams, right, throughout in the San Antonio is really good there for a while. Obviously, Utah Jazz, Malone and Stockton, right? Like there were, I think, again, the guy who was in second place to get their shot at Jordan, I think could have been 10 teams right after the Bulls that had a legitimate shot if the ball just bounces their way, they don't go through any injuries, right? And they get the fortunate call here or there, right? They can be the ones in the finals playing Jordan or in the conference finals playing the Bulls, right? And so I do think the 90s is overall deeper, right? Maybe not quite as top heavy. I'm going to use that word or that description, not as a negative, but just to kind of get my point across that maybe the top teams of the 80s, I'd probably give it to you on average or better. But I think like 1 through 10, 1 through 15, I think the 90s were much deeper overall. Again, with the salary cap, I think is a good explanation of that as well.
So you brought up about the 90s preseason betting odds to talk about how the league had more parity. I mean, I know you know this, and those things are often wrong. I mean, look at the Lakers. They were what, third this last year to win the championship. I mean, I'm not saying it's crazy to look at that stuff. I'm just saying I don't think that's a way to show that there's parity personally. Um, and then you're talking about Michael Jordan being a huge superstar in the 90s. He absolutely was. He's obviously the biggest icon, which he gained most of that notoriety in the 90s. However, he cut his teeth and was super iconic within the 80s as well, which I'll explain some instances in the near term. There were great teams in the 90s, but the 80s had the greater consistent teams that went to the finals. That's what I would say. And I think, in my opinion, that's why it makes the decade greater. But with iconic moments, I wanted to talk about some of these things. I want to ask you if you can retort with some iconic moments from the 90s versus the 80s that have more to do with other than Reggie Miller or Michael Jordan. Some of the ones that I'm going to give are the 80s, the Dr. J hanging under the rim, the layup for the finals. And then sorry, I got the year wrong with that, but just to the point of it is you got Magic Johnson with his winning the Finals MVP, having that stellar game jumping center. You've got Magic Johnson with the baby sky hook in '87 over Kevin McHale. You've got Larry Bird stealing the ball against the Pistons to continue going on to the finals, passing it to DJ. You've got Michael Jordan doing the multiple dunk contests against Dominique Wilkins, and to include other guys like Dr. J, when the dunk contest was just an absolute show. It was great. It made one of the things that propelled him to be iconic. in 86 when Michael Jordan still has the record for having the most points of all time in a playoff series in one game. There's a litany of things. The only things that I can remember, not to give you any of these things again, are moments that came from Michael Jordan and Reggie Miller that people talk about. Other than that, I think you're really stuck on the things that happened in the 80s. You got the faux 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 statement from Moses Malone. Uh, and I just don't think it's even close with iconic moments outside of just talking about Michael Jordan and Reggie Miller, which were great. And there were a lot of them. I'm not saying there weren't. But I think the difference and the totality comes with the 80s from different people.
Yeah. So, again, if we take away Jordan, I mean, it's like saying if we take away Magic and Bird in a way, and what are you left with? I do concede your point a little bit though, or I see what you're saying with moments per se, but I think the 90s again, when you have a star on every team in a way, it's more like personalities and storylines. I think in the 90s dominated per se than moments outside of Jordan, right? I mean, back to back Houston's pretty cool, right? But if you're talking about specific like plays, like a game winner, you might have a point there. But uh, to wrap it up, right? This is my last round. I don't know if I would call the 90s a superstar era, but it was a star era, right? And I'm going to go back to the hard salary cap. We have a much bigger leveling out of the playing field. Things like bird rights and exceptions are allowing these smaller market teams to retain talent through more avenues and giving them a little bit of an advantage. And so we have this culmination of sort of competitive practices, still colliding with the old school competitiveness and the talent, right? That obviously the NBA has and has sort of galvanized after the expansion era, right? Kind of teams have solidified and we now have like a good representation of NBA talent per se, right? This coinciding with, again, I think the media and the cable, we get to see an unfiltered view of all these stars on all these teams who, again, this is like another elevation of the league in a way. I think another marketing ploy that worked, but didn't necessarily destroy the league, right? This is before things like load management had come into play, and players were not making this ungodly amount of money where they go from basketball players to assets, right? So we're still in this. I think the 90s is this perfect petri dish or this really good mix of competitive talent throughout the league with rules like the hard salary cap, but we're still getting that sort of old school style that fans like. The game was still methodical. You tried to work the shot clock for 20 seconds, right? It was inside outside game, right? You could see these aspects of the old school and the players were still before this PC banana boat culture. But yet we also in the 90s is a good transition era. We begin to see this new guard play, largely led by Michael Jordan, although he wasn't the only one. Led like this new flair of guard play, but it hadn't traded anything for the game, right? It only complemented when necessary. And so I think stylistically, competitively, and talent-wise throughout the 90s, I think as a fan, looking back, I think that was the best era of basketball.
I I get all your points, and I'm not saying they're not great points you made, but I just want to retort with some. But before that, thank you again for this debate. Long time coming.
Yeah. It was actually better than I thought it was going to be too.
Yeah. Um, but the retort was some of the things that you were saying. I don't. I think managership did change the league, the administrative aspects of it, but I don't think it was the foundation for the greatness of the league in the decade. It may have been for the better. I'm not going to say that it wasn't a big deal because it is. It's a major change for the league. Um, but one thing I wanted to add it to was the influence of the 80s on to the rest of the NBA. And before I go and recap what I was talking about, is that 1980s was really the first time that you got to see the three-pointer introduced to the league. You got to see the more branding of stars. You got to see the shoe sales, Michael Jordan getting the Air Jordan brand. you got guys way more on TV like Larry Bird, Magic Johnson selling Converse amongst everybody that had the Converse. I think Kevin McHale was Converse amongst some other guys. The point of it is that it really set the foundation for the 90s. Now, the 90s gets credit for what it did too, but I appreciate the 80s more in respect to its greatness because it set the foundation, in my opinion, to propel the 90s to go to where it did go. But the things that I talked about, just a recap of why I think that the 80s were greater, I think it had the greater players in total, collectively, that you could say were more iconic. You got the Dr. J's of the world, the Magic Johnsons, the Larry Birds, the Michael Jordans, the Moses Malones, the Dominique Wilkins, amongst others. The teams, I think the teams were more impactful in total. I'm not saying it was they were any of them were greater than the Bulls. I'm saying together, collectively, I think throughout the decade, they had more impact on the entire NBA because the Bulls, I believe that the Pistons and the Rockets and the Spurs weren't nearly as impactful as the other ones. The iconic moments, the hanging on the rim with Dr. J, the baby skyhook, the hustle plays by Larry Bird, the slam dunk contest by Michael Jordan. I think all of these things collectively outweigh what the 90s had done. They had the greater single dynasty, I believe. But you can argue that that's not true. I won't because I don't believe that. Um, but the 80s, I believe, were greater for all these things. Thanks for the debate. It was great. Um, yeah, man. All right. So yeah, why is it? Oh, it didn't.
Yes,
It didn't close
I'm
down there.
always kind of interested how like this whole tournament's been going because it's so nuanced, right? Like a lot of these, I look at a lot of other guys' top 10 lists, and I'm like, it's like I could see it, right? Like I can see why you have that guy there or whatever. And then
Hmm.
the teams, and then you get into the eras, and I'm always like, every time I go into a debate, I'm always like, I have to like think about how I'm gonna argue this, right? Because it's like trying to find the smallest hole in someone's game to attack because the differences are so small. But they end up being, I think, interesting. Like people are getting into the weeds, I think, in an interesting way. So it ends up being better than I think.
Yeah, no, it's yeah. There's so many ways you can approach these debates, and yeah, it's this one was fun too. I know you like to go first, but I'm glad I didn't go first.
Yeah, yeah. I like setting the tone in a way, like to also, it's like there's always that chance that you'll get someone else to chase you if you lead, right? And
Hmm.
whereas if I'm am going second, I'm just gonna say what I'm like almost totally ignoring what you say in your opening because I don't want to chase and get off my pace, right? But if you go first, there's always this small chance that someone will chase and want to rebuttal everything you said and they'll get lost. And that could be an advantage. But it's always good to come out strong, right? If you have a good opening and just laying down the hammer in the first 3 minutes, like sometimes that goes a long way too.
Yeah, no, I agree. If you can catch somebody in the first round and you beat um like your opponent has no idea how to react, or you've just brought up great points that they didn't consider, and they're done for. So
Yeah.
if you go first, um, sorry, Rex is in the chat. He says, "Am I the only one that thinks Dart looks more like Rex Chapman every day?"
Oh man, that's a good one. That's hilarious.
Yep. But I dropped the link if anyone wants to call in. You can come in to my page. That's the easiest way. They got a lot of comments from your page, Nick, which is
Really?
yeah. Unless
Hmm.
somebody else paired the channel in the meantime, but
Maybe someone else paired.
no, it's just oh no,
But say not a lot of
no.
people watch my live streams.
It says that Robbins and Hoop Gods are here. Oh, it's probably
Okay,
because
cool.
of our well, it's probably because of our meeting that we had earlier, but
Yeah, that's right. Our
um
secret meeting we can't tell anybody about.
yeah. But we got T Perfect here. How you doing, Travis?
Good. I mean, just like the absolute best debate I've ever seen, and
I do feel it was a good one, dude. I honestly, like when we were going through it, I did feel like it was a pretty good one.
no, honestly, I think Dart, and I mean, I'm not gonna be salty or anything, but Dart made a great argument for them, like way better than Rance did, because Dart brought facts. He juxtaposed some actual name. Or I'm sorry, you, Nick. I'm sorry. I was the '90s. I was. Yeah.
Yeah.
Both you both did great, but
I didn't bring anything.
no. Dart did great too. I mean, because you had names. You named specific instances of like dynasties. You kind of juxtaposed them and compared them to some other '90s teams. Nick, you did fantastic because obviously you brought up the salary cap. Um, you I like your point about well maybe the '80s had a little bit more heavier in terms of like star power, top heavy, I should say.
Yeah.
Then I think like you said, there was a little bit more parity as far as like I think it was you said like 1 through 15, which probably filled out the roster a little bit more as far as that go. But both great points on both sides. I think it's a total toss up. Um, I just respect it when people are nuanced, like you said, nuanced in their takes, and
Yeah. You're really getting into like the weeds, the esoteric
yeah,
stuff.
yeah. When they actually bring facts, not just narratives, and like they say, okay, here's why I support it with fact. I think that's really good.
We have Switzerland Rex here. How are you today, sir?
I am staying neutral.
Did you enjoy the debate at least?
Yes, I did. It started when I was at the IHOP with my boys, so I had the volume turned down. Was just reading the comments, but got home and got on here as quick as I could.
Yeah. How's everything going otherwise for you? You gonna come back to the show anytime soon, or?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Rex is like me, man. Like I'm just like, nah. If I don't feel like it, I'm just not gonna do it.
Well, we got some medical stuff going on with different members of the family, and then I got a couple races coming up. That I have done no training for at all.
That's crazy. You still cycle like that. That's pretty cool.
24-hour championships are coming. How far can you ride a bike in 24 hours?
I did 5 miles the other day. My legs are dead.
I got a really important question for Travis though. Do you think I look like Rex Chapman, and do you think I'm going to continue to look like Rex Chapman every day? Do you think I'm?
I didn't think about that until Rex said it, but absolutely.
That's funny.
It looks like you've lost a bit of weight in your face, and now you're starting your chin line is starting to look more like his, and then the little bit of stubble. It just looks just at the moment. I don't know.
Yeah, I still have multiple chins, but they're starting to go away. but yeah. No, I thought this was a great debate. I was happy to finally debate Nick because we've danced around it for over a year at this point about trying to figure out when to debate something, and I guess it just came to be. We both thought that these decades were greater than the others, so there we go.
Where'd you have the 90s at? I didn't even look.
Second.
Okay, I figured you did.
Yeah.
Yeah. Next to what? 80s?
80s first, 90s second, yeah.
Oh, okay.
That's I had 90s, 80s, 2000s, 70s, 60s.
You see, I'm basically the opposite of Nick.
Yeah, 67. Yeah, I can see that.
Well, 70s for me, because that was that's where traditional basketball reached its highest level before they started changing the game and changing the NBA to be purely entertainment driven. The game was still about the players. And
yeah,
I'm not a fan. I don't care how much stuff they do to try and liven up the game to get people to watch. I want to play what's under the rules and the strategies that are best for the players.
I just wish they'd bring back like rampant drug use. Like, let's get some of that going. And like,
It never left, dude. It's just different drugs.
Yeah,
exactly.
I
The fun
I
one.
agree with
Never
that.
left.
Yeah, it definitely never left.
Yeah.
Let's
Just
get
like
Keep
it's never
Elijah
left
one up here.
society.
Like, he has a lot to say. Bring it up. I want to hear his takes.
Oh, there's
Well, what's he saying, or who's he siding with?
I don't know. He says 70s were garbage, league MVP. He says 60s were trash too.
oh, I
Yeah,
think my
typical casual.
You look like that dude from Just Shoot Me.
yeah.
I
my,
like how he says the MVP pool when he mentions Bob McAdoo. Well, if you actually look at Kevin Durant's resume, it's actually almost exactly Bob McAdoo's. He's a modern version of Bob McAdoo. That's what he is.
Was Bob McAdoo a 50, 40, 90 perennial shoot?
All right, what kind of question is that? You can't be 50, 40, 90 if there's no 40.
Yeah.
There's no three-point line back in the 70s.
Damn, he got you on that one.
He did.
Yeah, I was
Just
gonna
testing
say. I think I got the 40s and 50s either because I said that you can combine the 10s in the modern and the 40s and 50s. I think I have the 40s and 50s third, and then I think it's the 60s and 70s. I don't remember if I have the 60s ahead and 40s and 50s, but hopefully I'll get that one and take an L for that because nobody's going to buy whatever I have to say for that, even though I may have a better argument.
I'm a little bit like Rex, but my endpoint's like the 2011 Mavs. After that, the game's just garbage. After that, it doesn't even matter. That was the last real.
Mavs.
That was the last real championship.
Unless they would have won 3 more games this finals, then you would have a totally different opinion.
Exactly. If Luka would have won this year, the game is back. The game is officially back.
Mavs will be good next year too.
I think so too. We have mainly everyone coming back, so I'm. The big difference about this year and like other years, like last 5 years, is like our roster and our construction of our just financial situation is 180 from where it's been. Like I'm actually excited a little bit to go into an off season and see what we can do.
Well, who's running the team now?
Nico, I have all trust in Nico Harrison, man. That guy's been making great moves.
I just find it interesting and not maybe coincidental or not coincidental that Cuban steps down and then they make the finals again.
Yeah, so the whole Cuban thing, the rumor is that he's selling the team so he doesn't have any conflicts if gambling ever comes into Texas. That's what the rumor is. So people think this is like a setup for something coming. And he sold it to the Adelsons. They're like big political people too, and so they think that might have like a little bit of there's some inside baseball going on there that like they must know something that's coming too or something like that, right? That seems to make sense, right? I could see. I don't think Cuban would ever give up the Mavs unless it was for something, like a next level play, and like I think a casino in Texas that would constitute, I think, a next level play for someone like Cuban.
Oh yeah.
Well, dude, Texans are going all the way this year, so you can.
Yeah, dude, they're good too. Damn. But my teams have been on fire, man. The Stars made it to the conference finals. Mavs made it to the finals. Aggie baseball's playing their game 1 of the finals today. Rangers won a World Series last year. Like my teams are just on absolute fire.
Yeah,
right
how very Florida 2020 of you.
Yeah.
That was my childhood back in Washington, D.C. I got to see the Bullets go to back-to-back finals and win one. Then right after that, the Redskins came up and went to 4 Super Bowls, won 3 of them. Georgetown Hoyas went to 3 national championship games and won 1 of them. I got to see all the teams.
Good times, man.
Hell yeah.
Yep. So Rex, I know you said you've recently been watching modern basketball.
I gave that up, but yeah, I can only take so much.
Yeah.
You
So
only
what
take
was?
so much.
I know you brought up the Mavs. I know you said you watched some playoff games and some LeBron stuff. If you had
Yeah.
to say what was your impression of the modern NBA game since you've actually watched it recently?
The players are being forced to play a way that they don't want to play. You have to shoot the three. You have to play the modern style of ball, and you have to be a great athlete. And that doesn't always just mean jumping. Okay, Luka Doncic is a fantastic athlete. Okay, he's got very nimble feet. He's got amazing hand-eye coordination.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, there's I mean, you can see it. You can see guys like when you look at Draymond Green. Draymond Green does not want to stand out at the three-point line and wait for Steph to go through pick and rolls to passing the ball. You know, that's guys are not playing how they're playing what works under the rules they are given. That's why I don't agree when people will sit there and say, "Oh, well, if this player today played in the 80s, he wouldn't be anything. Or if that player from the 80s played today, he wouldn't even be in the NBA," and all that. That's all bull. Okay? Human evolution does not change over decades. The greatest player in the 40s had the same physical attributes as the greatest player of today. It is just how it's been shaped over the course of their lifetime as to which attributes come to the top, which ones are more requested and more needed for the rules at hand.
It's a good way of putting it.
The rules are what determine the game. Okay, the rules. If McGinnis had played in the 2000s instead of the 70s, he would be LeBron. If LeBron had played in the 80s and 90s, he'd be more of a Karl Malone. The players play. Okay, players play.
We have the Terminator here.
It's the rules that they're forced to play under. It is what determines what you see on TV as a consumer of their product. Mm-hmm. You know, there's a lot of guys. I remember the talk of Dennis Scott. Y'all remember him?
Yes, sir. 3D Orlando Magic.
3D Orlando Magic. Nickname when he got there was 3D. Why was his nickname 3D?
3 and D.
Shoot that long ball, 40%.
He could shoot that long ball. You know that when he was an All-American in high school as a sophomore at Flint Hill Prep, and the write-up on him at 15 years old was he was the best low-post basketball player in America. That's how he played in high school because there was no three. That's how he played. He was being touted as the next Mark Aguirre. Then they put the three-point line in college, and he started putting them up. He started perfecting that, and he carried it to the NBA. But that wasn't his natural playing style. He was a low-post player, and at 15 was considered the best low-post player in all of high school basketball. 3D. Guys can play basketball. Okay? They all can play. How you see them play on TV is determined by how the owners of the NBA want their product to be put out and what rules are put in place.
We have the Terminator here. Hoop God, how are you today?
Oh, man, I'm just enjoying another great day of basketball, man. How you gentlemen doing today?
Good.
Doing good.
So, okay, I want to just get brought up to speed with, I heard Rex. Hey, Rex, glad to see you back, man. You just disappeared on us, man. We need that infinite knowledge. But
Dart knew what was going on, but he was keeping it quiet for me. But Dart knew what was going on.
So like, how far are you guys into the discussion? Because if there's a player I wanted to bring up, but I just wanted to like get brought up to speed first.
Just go. Oh,
Okay,
Go ahead,
so
Ray.
I believe, just so you know what happened with the debate, in my opinion, and I believe T Perfect as well, you just missed the ultimate perfect debate that ended up exactly a 50-50 tie. And they got to figure out who's going to move on because it was perfect.
I can respect that. So with the I would say, like, with the whole long ball, 3-ball, who would you guys say? Hey, Rex, don't you answer this neither, Rex. Okay, just hold on. Who would you guys say the first stretch big in the game of basketball? Just right off top.
What do you mean by a stretch big?
Like a guy that could hit it. I guess he had range from like 19 to 20 feet out.
I don't know, Neil Johnson.
Okay. What about you, Nick?
I guess when I think big, has to be at least a power forward.
Yeah, no, like power forward, center. Like, you can't go down to a small forward.
Pettit, right? Was he a little bit of a shooter?
A little bit.
Yeah, but I believe somebody surpassed him.
Neil Johnson's only 6'8", so I guess I'm out of it. I just knew he was a big man.
Okay.
He played center and power forward, though.
What about you, T Perfect?
Yeah.
Who would you take as the original stretch big? Is Mike muted?
Is he there?
I don't know.
You guys hear me?
Yeah.
We hear you now. Yep.
Yeah. Who would you take? T
Sorry about that. Yeah, I would say my thought originally went to Pettit too, but like I said, I don't have his exact. I mean, maybe I'd say if you're talking about like since the merger or whatnot, I mean, you could say like I almost said like Walt Frazier.
No.
He is a guard.
Yeah, stretch big, not a guard. Stretch big.
Stretch big. Okay. I don't know. That's a great question. I'd actually have to think about that for a minute.
Okay. Rex, go ahead, because I believe we're on the same wavelength.
Okay, well, you had Dolph Shays and Neil Johnson were stretch bigs for that era, but they weren't actual, I mean, what we would consider today bigs. Bob Pettit was, I think calling him a stretch big is actually a slight to his game. He was much, much more than that, but he had that in his game. If you go early 70s, that's when Jerry Lucas left Cincinnati and went to the Knicks during their second championship. They ran a specific play of him taking the ball at the top of the key in what would today be a three-pointer from the top of the key, and he would run that play as a point power forward and would take that shot. It was a play that they ran just for him. So, and he was a big guy. Now we're talking also 6'9" like the others, but he was also a rebounder and a much bigger guy.
Right.
So I put those three as the ones that never got the credit for being stretch bigs, but were stretch bigs. And then you start seeing them pop up in the 80s. The biggest one, I think, that is overlooked, but he's not overlooked anymore, but Jack Sikma, the first stretch center, stretch 5. That's a more definitive position. And Jack Sikma was the first stretch 5. He actually had a reverse post-up move where he'd post up at 20 feet, where the defender thought they had him where they wanted him. He would be on the baseline, a step in from the three-point line when it was a brand new shot. So that's where you want your center, right? If you're on defense, that's where you want your guy to get the center. You want him up in that corner where he can't do anything, right?
Yep.
But Jack Sikma had a drop step back, the original step back 3, where instead of using his strong foot and doing a post move where you spin towards the basket, he would drop step and face back and shoot a three from the corner as a 6'11 and a half center. And it was in his shooting style behind his head and above, you couldn't block it. But look at Jack Sikma doing that move. It was the original step back three, and it was done by a young center in Seattle that never got the props for it until the last couple years. I think he finally got into the Hall of Fame.
Oop God, were you on the Jack Sikma wavelength?
Kind of, but not really. I'm going to tell y'all who I was talking about.
All right.
Bob McAdoo.
Yeah. But once again, to me, calling him a stretch four is oversimplifying his game. When he was MVP, he was playing center that year. Mm-hmm. He was in the low post that year. But he was such a wildly athletic player before his knee injury. Most people, just like Kareem, most players today, most fans today, when you say Kareem, they picture old Kareem.
With the Lakers,
Yeah, from 85 to 89 with the Lakers, when that was not – young Kareem looked more like Wemby. Young Kareem could move. Yeah. He was agile. He could run the court faster than any other big man. Mm-hmm. He was fluid. People look at him now and they equate him as, just one of these guys like Joel Embiid or somebody, I guess. I don't know. I
was about to say Jack Sikma and McAdoo in that order.
Yeah, the reason why is that they just don't take time to do the research. Because what you're saying about young Kareem, it's absolutely true. I mean, he had like a little 8 to 10 footer back then as well. Yeah. But once he developed that skyhook, it's like, hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
I always say 70s Kareem is my first pick overall in any drafts.
Yeah, I mean, what people don't understand about the skyhook is he had the skyhook. He was taught the skyhook in grade school.
Yeah.
He had his skyhook all the way through high school, all the way through college. He didn't use it as often because playing against smaller, less skilled players, because let's be honest, if he could have went pro out of high school, he would have.
Yeah, I believe it.
Okay, when he was playing on the JV team at UCLA, he was better than all but maybe 3 centers in the NBA. Maybe Russell, maybe Wilt, and maybe Thurman were ahead of him, and Thurman is a close call. He could have came straight out of high school and been at the very top of the pecking order. But he didn't need to use the skyhook then.
Rex, I got a question for you because this is something that just came up. So a lot of people would say that Wilt Chamberlain had the ability to be the greatest instead of, not having to go to college or play with the Globetrotters. What do you think about Bill Russell in the same light that you're talking about with Kareem? Do you think that he would have been going into college or his first year in college or straight out of high school, particularly, do you think that he would have been one of the great centers?
No, because that he was not. Everyone knew who Wilt was in high school. It was national storylines. What was Overbrook High School and this kid Wilt Chamberlain doing? Okay. Same with Kareem. Everyone knew who Kareem. Well, Lou Alcindor. Everyone knew who Big Lou was. Everyone. Russell was not highly recruited. In fact, was not recruited at all out of high school because he played a style that no one understood except his own coach. And even today, when I hear fans argue, no one understands how Bill Russell played even today. That's why I say I don't believe in a GOAT, never have, never will. But if you said you have to choose one guy, you have to choose just one, I'm picking Bill Russell because he's the only player who has never been duplicated. Nobody plays like him. No one ever played like him before, and no one has ever played like him during his career, and no one has ever played like him since. He was completely unique, and virtually no one under 30 even has a clue as to how he was effective.
Hey Rex, I got a question when you finish.
Yeah, go ahead.
So I
Rex,
do. Agree.
Rex Chapman or Switzerland Rex?
Oh no, I'm gonna say OG Rex, OG with that basketball wisdom. No, I
Well, it's
agree.
his channel. It's his channel.
So I agree with your take on nobody duplicating Russell. But when you were speaking on him, three guys came to my mind, and I want everybody's opinion when I say this. When you said Russell, okay, I'm thinking of the intensity of Kevin Garnett, right? I'm thinking the defensive acumen of Dennis Rodman, and then I'm thinking leadership Tim Duncan. I get Bill Russell when I put all three of those into one. What do y'all think?
Well, I mean, it's hard to compare. I understand the comparison to Rodman. Later in Rodman's career, when Rodman started out, he was playing perimeter guys when he was young.
Yeah.
Then he moved to power forward over small forward, and he started leading the league in rebounds, and then started defending big men.
Yeah.
But it's actually Jerry West has a great little clip where he talks about the difference between Wilt and Russell defensively. And he says Wilt was just a behemoth. He was just so big and so athletic. You couldn't shoot over Wilt. You could not. He could jump up and grab it, anything, no matter how high you put it. You had to put it ridiculously stupid high to get it over him, and then you're going to miss it. But Wilt did not have quick feet. You could get around Wilt. In fact, that's the logo. The picture that they got the logo from is a picture of Jerry West dribbling around Wilt Chamberlain.
That's cool. I didn't know that.
I had the picture. It's from Sport Magazine. He said the difference with Russell is as long as you saw Russell, you knew you had a chance at getting it off. But he said when you would drive, this is him speaking, Jerry West. I would drive past my guy, and I didn't look at the rim. I would drive past my guy, and as I was going to the basket, I would look for Russell. Because the scariest part was when you couldn't see him.
Psychological.
Because you know he's there. And Russell would Wilt would block shots by waiting for you to come to him, and he could just reach such a high point, he would get 8 block shots a game, which was his average in games that we had recorded. Yeah. The difference with Russell was he got his blocks from all angles because of he literally was like a plastic man. Stacey Augman's nickname. You can see Google Russell blocks and hit images and just see the different blocks that they have pictures of. And Russell will be jumping forward, and both of his arms behind his body and his head turned all the way around like a stinking owl, and he's blocking a shot by a guy 3 foot behind him. And he's blocking shots on the other side of the basket. He's coming up underneath the basket and blocking them away. He's jumping out, hitting jumpers, and then taking off down the court when his teammate grabs the loose ball. He's getting blocks from all different angles. And that's the difference. Rodman never really, I don't know if Rodman ever averaged more than 1 block a game. Rodman was all position defense and getting you out of your game, getting you frustrated. Russell just plain beat you. He just beat you.
I was more so saying like the rebounding aspect of Rodman. So let me clarify that.
Yeah, the hustle for the rebounds. But his demeanor
was the actual best player ever, which is Hakeem Olajuwon.
Hakeem, yeah.
Y'all think he was the best player, or not the greatest? You think he's the best?
Greatest? No, you can't make an argument for him as the greatest because resumes do mean something. I mean, I don't think
you're talking about Wilt.
No, Hakeem.
Oh,
Yeah, I mean,
But
No.
Hakeem, I think, is.
I got Hakeem as my best center, but greatest. Yeah,
I think
I would
Hakeem's
say
the most skilled
No.
player. No.
I don't think he's the. I mean, I personally don't think he's the best. I think he's a great skill player, but
yeah, he might be the most versatile player of all time. Maybe, I mean, finishing top 10 in 4 categories is pretty fucking
Yeah,
impressive.
I mean, he's definitely the best two-way player ever. I mean, you could say maybe
Yeah.
Will Chamberlain, but
and he was top 10 in steals for like what 25 years before. Like it just
he's
recently
the only center to ever. He's the only center to ever average, or right now be top 5 among centers in steals and blocks per game.
Yeah.
Well, that's an irrelevant stat because they didn't keep steal and blocks back for Russell, Chamberlain, Nate Thurman. Nate Thurman's probably higher than all of them.
yeah.
Hey, so Rex, I found the stat with Wilt, the Quint. Let's make sure I'm saying it right. Not quadruple double, but the
Quintuple double.
Quintuple.
Yeah.
Quintuple double.
So who charted that game? Because they recorded his blocks and steals. Like I'm not saying that it's not accurate, but
No, they record. Okay, there's a difference between like have you ever gone to a baseball game and seen how they record baseball games? Did you guys ever learn how to keep track of a baseball game? Fill out a scorecard with the balls, the strikes, the out to center field, a double play for.
Hold on, Rex. This guy asked a quick question. He says, "Who's your starting 5 if you're putting together the ultimate team?" Hakeem, Tim Duncan, Pippen, Jordan, Magic. I mean, is that the correct answer?
I mean that's a nice 5.
No, we did a so. I know we did a top. Me, Nick, and Rex did a top 5 team of all time. What team would you make? We did a show on it. In YouTube terms, a million years ago.
I might put Bill Russell at the small forward. I'm not sure. I know he can defend.
So I put Hakeem at the power forward. Wilt
Yeah,
at the 5, Jordan, Kobe at the 1 and 2, and I actually think I kind of went back and forth with like LeBron and Hakeem. I think I ended up picking LeBron just for the up and down open court game, and obviously Bird at the 3. But
yeah, I'm
Hakeem
taking
or LeBron kind of.
I'm taking MJ, Magic, Bird, and like Nick said, I'm putting Bill Russell at the 4, and I'm putting Dream at the 5. And I got Kobe as my 6th man.
Pretty unstoppable.
Rex, what was your team again?
I have no clue.
He had Dirk. He had Dirk, and there was another modern player that was kind of surprising. I think, if I remember right.
I think it's Steph in there.
Maybe, yeah. I gotta go, guys. I got some stuff I gotta run and do with the family. So, it was a great debate. Loved it as always, and I'll see you guys on the next one.
Awesome,
Indeed.
man. Have a great day, dude. Yeah, great debate.
Yep. Bye, guys.
Bye. My team was John Stockton, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Bill Russell, and David Robinson. And it was going to be a fast break offense. And whenever they did the half court set, there'd be options.
Oh yeah, that pick and roll.
I believe the team that I picked for that was Jordan at point with Steph at shooting guard. Tell me who you're going to cover. Right? Right?
Yeah.
Jordan can play. We know Jordan can play point. He averaged a triple. He had 10 triple doubles in an 11 game span when he played point guard in 88 or 89. So we know he can play. So I want Jordan at the point, handling the ball, coming down with Steph running off screens. Bird as a small forward. He'll score as much as he needs to, rebound when he has to. Right? I had Russell in there because I want that team leadership and defensive presence, but I cannot remember who else was it Dirk? Did I have Dirk in there as a 3-point shooter with the modern game?
You had 2 teams.
Wait.
You cheated and had 2 teams, but I don't remember what your teams were.
I got a question for you, but I want to ask Rex this real quick because I need to know. So Rex, with that lineup, which is lethal, who is going to be the screener in the split screen action where MJ and Curry are splitting? Who's going to be the screener in that action?
Well, what I wouldn't run. What I would have is I'd have a high pick and roll with Dirk.
Okay. I like
and
that.
either he gets a step back three, or if you overcommit, Jordan can just take it into the middle and say you play perfect defense or you run up on them.
Okay.
Then you throw the weak side pass to Curry, just standing on the other 3-point line.
Gotcha. Hey, so Dart, with your lineup, right?
But to be fair, when you said I had two teams, because I asked, what rules are we playing by? And no one gave me an answer. So I had a team that I would have for like modern. In the modern game, that's the team I would have with Bird, Dirk, and Curry.
Yeah.
On the 3-point line, my rebounder with Russell and defender protecting the rim, and then Jordan has the point. So what are you going to do?
I think I'm going to do the big farmhouse.
Say it again.
T Perfect is ordering food.
Oh. So Dart, can you
I want extra fries for me.
Yeah, extra salt too. Sea salt, by the way, the healthy version. But hey, Dart, so can you clarify for the people in the comments as to how valuable John Stockton is? But this is why. Because when I hear people talk about Stockton, right, they'll be like, oh, they'll just immediately look at his stats. And I'm like, how much film have you watched? That's how I know they didn't watch it. But Dart, can you clarify to the people as to why Gary Payton is on record of saying he would rather guard Michael Jordan over John Stockton, while Isaiah Thomas even said John Stockton was his toughest opponent, and why Baron Davis had to come out and say John Stockton made him question if he even knew how to play basketball? Because I just want them to get this education.
Well, I'll bring it up real fast, but I think looking at his stats do tell a good story about how he was able to accumulate them. So the people that say that they look at his stats and ignore him, I don't find that to be true, because he won 9 assist titles in a row and 2 steals titles, and he's the all-time leader in both. So he did accumulate a lot per season either way. But with the qualitative stuff that those guys said, they said he was really crafty and never did the same thing twice. They didn't know what he was due, and that explains how versatile he was and how he switched things up in respect to that, which is not giving great examples. But I want to explain why I'd have him on my team. Is that he would be the half court point guard. Oh, sorry, sorry. But he'd be the half-court point guard. Magic Johnson would be going off the fast break. He'd be able to go and pass down, pass off a rebound. Same with Bill Russell to the fast breakers of David Robinson and Michael Jordan. And then John Stockton would be able to be in the half court with the pick and roll. He'd also be a 3-point option if Magic got the ball or Jordan got the ball, who also were great ball handlers. And then Bill Russell and David Robinson played in different parts of the court. So they would be Bill Russell had an underrated mid-range shot. And then David Robinson was staying the dunker spot. They had the great defenses, both of those guys. Well, all those guys had great defense. And Magic Johnson's defense, in my opinion, is underrated. But he may not have been the greatest on-ball defender, but he still did everything else really good. So, but yeah, John Stockton, in a phrase, was versatile and crafty, as a lot of people would say, per what the other NBA players would say, outside of just looking at a stat sheet.
That was a very effective evaluation, because I tell these guys this all the time. If you have not watched enough footage of Stockton, don't talk to me about Stockton. I don't care about what his points per game, but clearly those points were effective when he needed to hit them, i.e. Charles Barkley missing an assignment, hits the 3, and what? They go to the finals. And I tell them that Stockton was not looked at to go out and score. He was looked at to, if you do not play me, if you do not honor me, I can make you pay for it, which is why they were so deadly with that pick and roll, because they would always have that down screen action on the weak side with Hornacek or the other guy. He's slipping my memory right now. But even when they would like overcommit, right? When they would try to stop you from running the pick and roll, okay, well, you're basically getting Stockton a layup. You think he's not going to take that? So it's like they hit you with so many options, and it's so fast that you're going to make a mistake. And what they did is they capitalized on your missteps, and they never beat themselves. That's what people don't understand about John Stockton.
Yeah, well, what people don't understand about John Stockton is John Stockton. Okay, the dude was brilliant. He was an A-class athlete. I don't care what you think you see by your eye test. The dude was an amazing athlete. He was fast. He's insanely strong. He's known for his hand strength. People would joke about his handshakes. The dude is he's got huge hands, incredibly strong. He's very fast, very quick. His brain is faster than his body. He reads the entire court. He is point guard perfection. When you talk about, oh, well, he only played this way, that's because they had the same coach for over a decade, and that's the way the coach wanted them to play. John Stockton in college was a scorer, not a point guard. He led his college conference in scoring 2 years in a row. He could shoot with the best. Look at what his field goal percentage is for his career. It's better than Bird's, better than Jordan's. He could play basketball. He could play it any way. He played the way the coach told him to play.
Right.
Which is what fans don't recognize. You play the way the coach tells you to play. And when you actually learn about John Stockton, watch some of his college games. There's a couple clips of him. There's even one YouTube clip of him in high school. When you watch how he plays, oh gosh, I can't think of the guy for Cleveland. He was a backup in Cleveland. Then he was Mark Price's backup, I believe, at one point, not Kevin Johnson. There was a point where 3 of Mark Price's backups ended up becoming all-stars, but they all started playing behind Mark Price. And it's driving me crazy. I can't remember who this one guy was, but he was talking about he couldn't wait to get in a game when he was a rookie. Yeah, he was going to show. He was going to take Stockton to school. And the other guys on the team were like, yeah, okay. Sure you are. And he said he tried to stop Stockton from getting to the left elbow because that's where he would initiate the offense. And said no matter what he did, no matter what he tried, they ended up at the left elbow every play. He could not stop him. And that's the thing. You see, fans look at it, and when you sit there and scream at a guy at the TV, and you're like, my God, the guy keeps doing the same move over and over again. Why don't they stop him? The easy answer is because they can't. Okay? So many fans look at that player and go, well, he can only do one thing. No, he's doing the one thing the coach wants him to do until you stop him. And if you can't stop him, he's going to keep doing it. It doesn't mean he's not skilled and can't do other things. It means what he's doing is working, so he's not stopping it. And that's where fans drive me crazy. They think that these guys are like one-trick ponies, or that these guys can only do this or only do that. When you get a ball handler, we're not talking about a 7'3" center maybe that can only do so. We're talking about a ball handler, a point guard, a guy that when he's on the court with other future Hall of Famers, they give him the ball to bring up and initiate the offense. Okay? That's what the other great players think of him. When he was on the Dream Team, John Stockton was not being treated like Christian Laettner. Okay? He was one of the Dream Teamers. And when he was in the game, Jordan, Bird, whoever, when they inbounded the ball, Jordan didn't go, give it to me. No, they gave it to John Stockton when he was on the court with Jordan and Bird. They gave it to Stockton. That's how great the guy was. Acknowledge it. what your little fanboy eyes see is not an eye test. What they see, what Jordan sees when he's on the court with the guy, that's the eye test. Because it's his eyes that matter, not yours. I'm done.
Acknowledge me, as Roman Reigns would say.
Right. No, I agree, because like I'm telling you, if you listen to these guys, they will swear John Stockton's not even top 50. I'm like, bruh, I'm not having this discussion, because clearly you've never watched a game to see how deadly he was. I said, because the team went as he went. If he does not orchestrate that offense and get them going and facilitating, they're not going to win. They're not going to be effective, because it's the point guard's job to get everybody in that rhythm, in that timing, in the flow. Because I tell them, outside the stat sheets, basketball is a field game. The point guard has to know where everybody is at their best and gets them the ball in their strengths, not their weaknesses. So that's ultimately how he improves your shooting percentages, because he knows Malone, top of the key, on the pick and roll or on that left elbow. I know he's deadly there. Hornacek coming off that screen action, like, it's timely. He has to get the ball as soon as he rubs shoulders off that screener. Why? Because you got 1,001, 1,002. Before you hit 1,002, the defender's there. He got to deliver that ball on time so he can shoot the ball in rhythm. I said, all that stuff.
They actually started that play with Jeff Malone before Hornacek.
Jeff Malone, yeah, that's the one I was forgetting. Jeff Malone, yeah, appreciate it. Yeah.
University of Mississippi still has a big number 24 on their court for Jeff Malone.
Yeah.
All right, gentlemen, I'm going to shut this thing down, but it was fun. I like the discussion with you two after the debate. For everyone that doesn't know, I'm going to be putting up a community poll on my channel asking who you thought won. Me, who argued for the 80s NBA being greater than the 90s NBA, who NMB Sports argued for. Do you gentlemen have any last words for the people before I shut this thing down?
Hey, Rex, don't leave us on a hiatus like that again.
Actually, there was another broadcast last night at 9:00 on another channel, who shall remain nameless, on Friday night, that had me thinking about a possible topic, but
just
upcoming.
Just get with me, man. I don't know what they did, but we can just, like I said, like, we can go do our show on Saturdays again if you're available then, because I like that, where it's just me and you, and we, it's not that we don't let callers on, but where you get more of a voice to talk about a lot of the earlier eras specifically.
There's just so much, because you know how much, is anyone going to argue that today the effects of marketing and advertising are bigger than they ever were? Because of social media, it's all about clicks. That's how they make money now. It's all about clicks. Whether it's true or not is irrelevant. They don't have to tell you a true story. They get paid when you click on the story.
Yeah.
Okay, it used to be they would get the story, then you would get paid for it. Now, you just got to click on the headline. The headline is so important now. And if you get the clicks, then, we got a thing called clickbait. That's what it is. So there's so much misrepresentation now of past basketball history that it's just, and some of the things I hear people say is just so wildly wrong. It's crazy. Like, just real quick, the whole Bill Russell thing, we've talked it to death, so it's not new to anyone listening here. But people still say, oh, Russell was only played defense.
Yeah.
All right, well, okay, well, that makes what he did even more exceptional, because tell me, would you ever vote for just a defensive player to be the MVP of the league 5 times?
Yeah, if you're stopping the other guy from scoring as much, and you're the common denominator, yeah, I'm definitely voting for MVP.
Yeah, but he wasn't just a defender. He has the 3rd highest assist average for any center in history.
Yeah. My apologies, Rex. Yeah, I mean, I looked it up. Well, it was 65 when he led the team in assists, and he shot a still record 70% from the field in that finals.
Yes, in another year, he led the team in scoring in the playoffs.
And then
He did what his team needed. He filled the holes. He was the perfect team player.
Right.
When he first joined the team, they were an offensive juggernaut that couldn't get a rebound and play defense. Then by the last championship, they were a defensive. In the later years, they were a more defensive team, and he took on more assists and more scoring.
Hey, Rex. I also found another interesting fact that Bill Russell never had their teams. Those Celtic teams were never top 3 in offensive rating.
No.
That just shows.
Well, this is what they were talking about. Okay, when you talk about and this is something that came up, Dart, when y'all were talking about teams and their competition, and this team was a 68 win team and beat a 72 win team, and this and all this, and this team won beating a 42 win team, and all that. All that is irrelevant because it all depends on the teams those particular years, what injuries they had, what coach was coaching them, at what point in their careers were these future Hall of Famers, were they rookie? Like when you talk about the 84, 85 Sixers, does anyone talk about rookie Charles Barkley? No. Because he played limited minutes at that point. But when you look at a roster, you go, oh my God. Like when I brought up to you about Buffalo. When Buffalo had Randy Brown, Bob McAdoo, Ernie D, Moses Malone, all on the same team. Yeah. They did nothing because they were either really young or really old at that time. They didn't mesh. It's none of that stuff is equal comparison. Russell's team won 11 titles. That's what matters, correct?
In respect to the team aspect of the game, yeah.
11 titles. And no, I'm talking about the team. I'm not talking about Russell specific. 11 titles in 13 years in that span. They won 60 games only 3 times. Yeah. They weren't an utterly dominant team.
Yeah.
360 win teams out of 13 years. But they were 10-0 in game 7s in the playoffs. That's not dominant. That's clutch. That's teamwork. That's not a bunch of all-stars trying to get theirs. That's a team with a focused goal.
Yeah.
And that's the difference. But yeah, we'll have to do something. Yep.
Rex, I know you say you're not a fan, but sorry, some of these comments are killing me here.
Yeah, Troy Diaz, really, you need to take a class on basketball. I'll teach it if you want.
No, but are you willing to send us off with the Michael Jordan fans are the best?
No.
I thought I'd get it out of you.
Michael Jordan is, in my opinion, the greatest shooting guard to play in the NBA. That's the best you'll get out of me.
All right. Well, thank you, live chat, for coming in. Everybody that tuned in. Hope you liked the debate. I hope you liked the discussion after. And Michael Jordan fans are